We're with John Corriea, the guru at active self-protection, a former pastor, and I'm sure you have a heart for church security.
Oh boy, I do.
So I don't know if you're on a team now or you just carry when you attend, but
so my travel schedule is so much that I can't be on a formal team right now, and the church that we attend is pretty small, so we have a pretty informal team as it is.
So I've transitioned from doing the same thing. I was never a pastor, but from informal, carrying all the time, always watching, to trying to be with a team now and give them some advice. And also I have a heart for helping, especially the small churches, you know, the 20, 40, 80, 100. You know, they can't afford a full-time security officer or police officers. So let's just talk about maybe 10 things you would tell new teams trying to get together. And one of the biggest things I see is just a total lack of visualization of what can really happen. And we just saw that this Easter with Sri Lanka.
Yeah, for sure. I think, you know, number one mistake that I see most make is they think this will never happen.
Right.
And this couldn't happen to us. And I think, you know, sometimes there's a theological underpinning of that. Well, Jesus will protect us. But God uses means, not just ends, right? So, you know, like David said, "Blessed be the Lord my God who prepares my hands for war and my fingers for battle." Yeah, so I don't want to use it, but you know, yeah, Jesus will protect us using me if He needs to, right? So I think recognizing these things do happen, and I think, I mean, even not including Sri Lanka, which of course sure looks at this point like it was ideological terrorism, but. Sutherland Springs, Texas, and Fresno, California, and Chattanooga, Tennessee, and the list goes on and on. Charleston, South Carolina, you know, these kind of things, the synagogue attacks in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia. Houses of worship are not the sanctuaries they once were.
I think we can just say no sanctuary is safe.
No, it's not. It's not by its definition, right? Because when somebody wants to make a statement, that's the way they can do that. Now, are we likely to have the kind of thing in the U.S. that they had in Sri Lanka? No, thankfully. But that doesn't mean it can't happen. And so, you know, failure to admit it's a problem does not make the problem go away. So that would be number one. I think the second one is the opposite side, though, is you want the church to be a fort. You know, you want to have Fort God. And
that's a good way to look at it.
And you can't do that. I mean, as a guy who's a pastor, you know, when the security guy argues with the pastor, and the security guy wants the church to be safe, secure, protected, and the pastor wants the church to be open and welcoming and inviting. Well, when the head dog argues with the security guy, guess who wins? The head dog wins. And so what I always tell folks to say instead is to recognize that your security has to function underneath your openness to make your house hospitable, right? If I invited you to my home and I had snarling dogs and you know, open holes in the floor and all these things, you wouldn't feel safe. We wouldn't be able to connect. Well, same thing. You have to feel safe and have to be safe in the house of God in order to worship. So, you know, recognizing that you don't have to have Fort God. I think the biggest one that I've seen of this is that when we were in Topeka, Kansas not long ago, we drove by Westboro Baptist Church, which has big high gates, and you know, stay away, all you people. And I go,
very welcoming.
Yeah, I'm not going in there, and for good reason, right? That's not how you want your church to be. So, and then I think number three would be recognizing that your security team, your safety team, I call it a safety team, is a ministry. It's not, you know, you're not the heavies, right? You're not in there. You're not the brute squad.
Ministries, missionaries first.
Yeah.
And then the gatekeepers second.
Well, and making sure, is everybody okay? If somebody seems out of place, are you all right? If somebody has a medical emergency, you're far more likely to have a medical problem, have a code atom, you know, a lost child. You're far more likely to have somebody have some heat exhaustion here in Arizona or something than you are to have somebody shooting the place up. So I think a lot of times church safety teams think about how are we going to deal with the shooting problem, which, I mean, that's obviously the worst day of any congregation's life. You'd never want it. But that's such a small problem compared to doing the ministry of keeping people safe.
I think that comes back to when you're forming your team is you're looking at maybe their heart first before what kind of skills they're bringing to the game.
I could train skills. Look, you know, if you say, well, I want to be on the security team, I want to be on the safety team. Okay, even if you say, I have zero skills, but I have a heart to do it. Cool, I could teach you the skills. But if your heart is, man, I'd really like to punch a guy in the mouth. You're probably not a good fit for my team, man. Thanks for coming, you know?
That's what I'm getting at,
And I think that recognizing the ministry aspect of it and recognizing what the real challenges are really help.
Let's talk about a baseline of training, because all the different churches I've been in, for instance, they'll say, oh, he was in the military 20 years ago, you don't have to pass the qualification, but you new guy who's just the NRA guy or whatever, you need to do all this. So how do we establish a reasonable baseline that we can apply across the board?
Well, okay, so I will get in trouble by saying that having been in the military, serving in the military has zero to do with being qualified for church safety and security. Even if you were an 11 Bravo, okay, so I wasn't, I was in the Navy, but
Right.
you're an Army 11 Bravo, you're an 0311 in the Marine Corps, so you're, a grunt. Great. Yeah, but you're used to working with a fire team, you're used to working in offensive operations, you're used to having a fully automatic firearm, a bunch of magazines, a plate carrier, buddies, air support. I got none of that on
Right.
church safety, right? So it doesn't mean that you're qualified, just the same way if someone else, so for instance, when somebody asked me, well, John, what does it take to be qualified to carry a firearm on campus when I was the pastor? Listen, if you carry a concealed firearm, it's none of my business. Like, I don't
Right.
want to know anything about it,
Yeah.
right? Just keep it concealed.
Right.
Now, what would I wish every person able to do? I think that you should take the longest shot that's inside your sanctuary, okay? And you should, in my opinion, be able to, with gun in hand, put a shot in an 8-inch circle at that distance in under 3 seconds from gun in hand. I think you should definitely hold yourself to that standard. And I certainly think anybody who carries, I would encourage anybody who carries for their own protection to be able to do something like pass the FBI qualification course to be able to do that. If it's somebody that I'm going to count on for their, for my safety, I think the two things that I want to see is I want to see a past FBI. I really like the Range Master Core Skills Test as well, to be able to score that at least an 80 or above. I would say 100 or above would be even better. To really challenge them if they're going to carry to a high standard. But okay, I'm going to hurt some more feelings. You're going to say, hey, I was a cop for 25 years, or I am a current cop. That's great. I know plenty of cops who can't shoot. That's not an automatic. You can probably shoot better than most private citizens.
Right. Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you could shoot. But the cops who dedicate themselves to that part of their craft are some of the best shooters that I've ever met. Right. So, I would definitely say that's a good thing. Now let's see if you actually train with your tools.
I think that's where the team concept can come into play, because if we truly are a safety and security team, then we should be taking the person that maybe doesn't shoot so well or hasn't shot in 20 years and working with them to bring them up to the standard that we want everybody else at.
Or maybe, listen, I'm not a shooter, but I have a paramedic certification.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool, you're doc. Like, I don't need you to have a gun on you.
Right.
You are doc, and so, corpsman up, let's go, and that's your place. Now, you may carry a firearm because that's your normal thing or whatever, but guess what? If I'm the designated security guy, that I am ballistic coverage for this whole area. Okay, fine. And when somebody goes, oh, I broke my hip and I fell over, I'm not going to go, let's go. I'm useless in that instance. I'm not qualified to deal with that either. Right. So I'm going to get on my mic or whatever and go, hey, I need doc in this area because I got a medical problem.
Right.
And I think that having a team concept is really important.
That's another pet peeve of mine. You talked about the radio. I see churches, especially small churches, they go to the box store, they buy a bunch of the little tiny cheapy walkie-talkies because it says 26-mile range.
Sure.
And then they're, in one building or the other and they can't talk across, or people next door are listening to what they're saying. What are you recommending for comms within small churches?
Really depends upon the size of the church and the facility. See, the problem with some of this is that every church is so unique that in some churches you go, look, man, we're in one little building and we don't need comms, right? My comms are,
yell.
Hey, Bill, you know what I mean? Like, that's all I've got.
Right.
Whereas in a big church, like, you're at a multi-site congregation, those kind of things, and you have multiple buildings or whatever, you need to have maybe some pretty sophisticated communications. Right. What I always say is that the people who need to talk need to be able to communicate quickly, right? And again, for the most part, not active killer designated, but if I'm in the children's ministry building and I go, hey, we've lost a child, which could happen, and I know it shouldn't, but it can.
Yeah, we dealt with this just a couple weeks ago.
And now you go, wait a minute, all con, everybody shut up, get off my radio, right? This is the description, I need to find this child. Cool, we're all on it. We got to be able to communicate. And that could be word of mouth. We actually, in my little church where we were at, we had a hard time going back and forth. And so we just ended up with phone calls. We just ended up saying, hey, listen, text, phone call. If it's not a huge emergency, but we need it, text over to the sound booth, and then they can figure it out from there. And so figuring out how do I get a hold of each other quickly. But you're right. I mean, those cheap radios are cheap for a reason. And so, stepping those up into something good, if you are at a place where that is important and necessary. I've seen bigger congregations, it becomes very necessary when you have 20, 25 people. And that's not just for the security guys necessarily. You may have different channels for
nursery.
Yeah, the nursery folks. You may have different channels for the worship team. You may have, all that stuff happens. So the logistics, this is why I was a pastor of a little church, right? Because those amount of logistics drove me nuts.
So your channel is fantastic for developing that mental awareness.
Thank you.
And that's something we just got to stress, because people go to the range and they train over and over, but we can't necessarily simulate what happens in real life events that you've diagnosed. So, without being a glorified promotion, why is it so important that we continue to train our mind by not just watching what you do, but these things in general?
Well, I think, that's why I started the channel, is because your brain can't tell the difference between virtual and actual, right? So, and somebody goes, oh, yes, I can. Really? So you're on your phone, you're on Facebook, and you get a video of a roller coaster going over a dip, and you go, what happens? Your stomach goes, oh, why? Dude, I'm sitting on my couch looking at my phone, and yet my brain has a hard time telling the difference. So when I watch somebody else's defensive encounter, I get the experience of that. So the more of that you can take in, whether that's on active self-protection or you're just, Google searching or whatever, can be very helpful. And I also think force-on-force training and force-on-force evolutions, and also just getting to the mat, getting your empty-handed skills. When somebody, it's go time, it's pressure time. I always joke with this, I'm going to jiu-jitsu tonight, and guess what's going to happen? The last 20 minutes is slap, go, and this dude is going to try to choke me to death.
There you go.
Now, we're friends, and he's not going to, hurt me, but guess what? There's no suspension of disbelief. He's going to try to break my arm right now. And so those experiences build a resilience and emotional fitness in you that nothing else will.
All right, and you talk about spiritual fitness, so let's talk about that right now to wrap things up.
Yeah, of course. Spiritual fitness says that every day you've said everything you need to say to your loved ones, that your loved ones never wonder, is Dad mad at me? Is Mom, are we okay? You say everything you need to say. Say I'm sorry to who you need to say sorry. Say I love you to who needs to say I love you. Never leave those unsaid with your family and your loved ones. And second thing is that, of course, you make sure that your relationship with Jesus is strong, that you've trusted Him by faith for eternal life, that you trust Him today for every bit of today, that you confess your sins as you need to, right? And that you live today with the end in mind, because today may be the end. And if you're living today with the end in mind, then if today is the end, then it's a joyous reunion.
Yep. And all this practice, everything we do for helping protect ourselves, our families, others, totally meaningless if there's not that relationship with Christ at the end.
I mean, if at the end of things, you end up in eternal damnation, well, then none of that mattered. I really think it doesn't. And honestly, as a believer in Jesus, we're all going to stand before the judgment seat of Christ, and I don't want to hear you wicked, lazy, evil servant. I want to hear well done, good and faithful servant. Like John, listen, you're knucklehead, but you did the best you could. Well done, buddy. And that's what really matters at the end of the day, no matter what else we're talking about. So that to me is the biggest thing, to get up today, to live today with the end in mind. So then that way it's eternally significant.
Well, I admire you from going from the pulpit to a ministry that is now basically worldwide.
It's crazy, man. I tell people all the time, my big problem with being a pastor was how much time I had to spend doing things that I didn't want to do. Now I get to make disciples, and I actually probably make more disciples, get more time doing the things I really want to do as a pastor, other than preaching in the pulpit. I get to do more now than I did then.
And the key step was obedience.
Yeah, I had to say, listen, it's time for me to step away from the pulpit. It's time for me to step away from vocational ministry. It was very hard, very difficult for me emotionally, because I had too much of my self-worth invested in it. But in doing so, I think the Lord's been happy. So.
All right. Congratulations, brother. Well done.
Appreciate you.
Yep.